How do you create an authentic and engaged community for your podcast? And what strategies are successful podcasters using to create connections with their audience? Joining me today to talk about community building strategies is Kendall Breitman. Kendall is a community manager at Riverside.fm and the sponsor of this podcast. And Riverside is a video and podcast creation platform leading thousands of creators in the community to elevate their work and help them create engaging content. Before joining Riverside, Kendall worked as a news reporter and television producer for the outlets like MSNBC and Bloomberg News. So whether you are just starting out in your podcasting journey or you're a seasoned professional, this episode is packed with actionable insights to help you build an authentic community around your podcast. I'm Yesenia Bocaneira, your video podcast and content creation coach, and this is Focus on Blue Podcast, where we share a variety of strategies to help you level up your podcast creation one episode at a time. Let's get started. Hi, Kendall. Thank you so very much for being on the show. How are you?
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to get to be on the show after we've had a bunch of meetings and now we're getting to record. I'm really excited to talk about a few things with you.
Me too. I'm so excited that you were able to join me on this episode, because right now I'm sharing a mindful content creation series where I'm focusing on just sharing strategies that really go back to that why of why you're creating your content, who are you serving, always going to that why and just being very intentional. And one of the things that I love about Riverside, aside from the technical awesomeness, is just the fact that you've been able to create a great community. And I wanted to ask you about that and just tell me a little bit how that started, and then let's go from there.
Yeah, well, technical awesomeness is something that I will continue to use after this. So thank you for introducing that into my life. I also so community. I started as community manager at Riverside, and my goal has always been with this job to create a community of podcasters and content creators. And beyond just creating it, creating an engaged community. So thinking of different ways that are actually going to get people to speak to each other, actually going to get people to get real value out of it. Because if you're going to be putting, especially as a business, if you're going to be putting a lot of time and effort into community, it's about making sure that that community also serves your goals and serves their goals. And actually the cool thing about community is that you kind of have to serve the goals of your users in order to serve your own. So really just mindful community building has been my focus here. The cool part though about the fact that I'm doing it with Riverside is that we have a really a community of people that are kind of built-in talkers, built-in communicators, really love to share with each other and actually make each other better. So I really lucked out in that aspect of I know that there are community management positions and things for other kind of topics. I really lucked out with the fact that the community I get to build is with podcasters and really great people like yourself.
That's so true. And I've been a member of the Riverside community on Facebook. And that is one of the biggest things that I love. It's just that constant encouragement. There's no competition. It's anybody posts a question on what to do on starting their podcast or technical problems or anything, everybody's just everybody's jumping in there and helping each other out. And I think that's really, really powerful. And it has a lot to say about the community of podcasters in general. Mm-hmm. The audience of my podcast, Focus on Blue Podcast, is mainly service-based entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and they're using podcasts or thinking of doing their podcast as a way to leverage, to help them set themselves as an authority building in thought leader in their industry. So we know that, we can go to Facebook, create that community, that group, and done. But what does it take to, what can you share to help these coaches, solo entrepreneurs, to build an authentic community that is actually engaged with the content?
Yeah. So I would say step number one, and this was recommended to me when I started, is talk to people in your community. So never assume. Like, I could have come into this community and said, like, great, I'd love to have a webinar series. I'd love to have X, Y, and Z, just kind of based on what I think might work. But if you want to build a really like authentic, engaged community, I cannot thank enough the creators that I started speaking to in the beginning of my journey, because I got so much information just about what they care about, what drives them. And then you're able to create content that connects to that, and you're able to make your community beneficial for them. So I'll give an example. When I started, I was coming from journalism. I was like, oh, people want to network with each other. That's the driver, right? But then I realized after speaking with people that everyone was really, really keen to learn. That's why they wanted to meet people. Like, the more people they met, the more learning that they can do by asking them questions. So then I was like, okay, we have this webinar series. What if instead of asking people at Riverside what they think, why don't we create a podcasters roundtable where we get like 3 people from the community and instead are able to answer questions for each other and talk about what's worked for them and give real life examples. We added that, and the registrations between like normal Riverside webinars that we were hosting and these podcaster roundtables were double. Like, we got double the registration of what we were used to, even more than double actually. So taking those conversations, thinking, okay, the person I just spoke to, what do they want? What would make them excited? What drives them? What are they passionate about? Trying to like glean that from your conversations, I think, is how you build the most authentic community. But then follow up would be, okay, I have that built in because I could just reach out to users and say, hey, I'd love to talk with you. Like, that might not be as built in for other people trying to start communities. If you have a small business, it could be. But in that case, looking at other communities. So for me also, I went to Reddit and I sorted by the most engaged posts. And then you see, like, okay, this is what got people talking. Like, try to find other communities that are already existing and see what gets people excited there. And I would say that that's really where you start.
I love that. I love the idea of going to Reddit and like checking out those conversations and see what's like resonating. And that goes also a note on like how you're reaching out to the community and creating these roundtables. This really just goes to show that having that, doing that cross marketing, like being a guest in other people's podcasts and just connecting with other people can really help you increase that brand awareness and just like expand your audience. That's a really
Yes.
I love that. I love that you mentioned that, and how great that it worked, even so great for Riverside as well.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's when I tell people who want to grow their shows, that's my biggest recommendation. Guest on other shows. You can post a billion times on social media and it could be helpful. But to get people off of their social media app over to your podcast, they're in scrolling mode. To get them to stop in the scrolling mode and move over to just like listening mode is very different. So if you can go on podcasts that are already talking about the subjects that you're talking about and introduce your voice to the conversation. I found so many podcasts that way, that they were a guest on another show I loved. I listened to them. I thought, wow, they were fun to listen to. I'd love to listen to another show. And you're catching them when they're already in that listening zone. So, like, yes, 100% guest on other podcasts.
Yeah, it's an audience that's already engaged, and it's an audience that already is listening to podcasts. So it's like warm. There's a great tool. I think it's called Raphonic Graph.
Yes. Yeah.
Where you can. I'll include the link in the episode's description so you can check it out. But it's like this great app where, not an app, like a page where you type in your podcast and it creates this graph where it connects it connects other podcasts that are similar in nature to the one that you're looking for. So it's a really great tool to do some research.
Or even if it's not directly related to yours. So, for example, if you're a sports I'm really just throwing this out there. If you're a sports podcaster around the time of the Super Bowl or something, and you I saw a post about how many cameras were at the Super Bowl. Then you could even just like link up with somebody who does a podcast about videography, and just be like, let's talk about the Super Bowl and how you capture these moments. So also being able to like kind of pivot your content into different places so that you don't feel like there's not a sense of competition, it feels, in the community of podcasting. So it's not like that you should be stopped from going on a show that's very much related to your topic, but it's just a great way to get out in front of some new people, to also have these little pivot moments where like unexpectedly I could be a great guest for this show. So I recommend doing that too.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm glad that you mentioned pivoting, because that could also be a good strategy for anybody who's pivoting their content, or just intentionally pivoting their content, or maybe like pivoting their business model. And then they want to use the podcast as that anchor point to start creating more content and set themselves as an authority thought leader in that area. So that would be a great way to kind of like dip your feet into like podcasting and into that new pivot
Absolutely.
topic.
Absolutely.
So what about, so if I know Riverside is a company, but what about for anybody who's wanting to create a community based on their personal brand? What can you recommend, or what thoughts you can share about, finding that balance between personal authenticity and like that professional side in that community building experience?
Well, I think that it's pretty similar. I'm going to say, and maybe that's controversial. I think that right now, people, even brands, they want to be like as authentic as possible. So there's a reason why on the community, I'm not posting as Riverside. Like, I'm posting as somebody that works at Riverside, but I'm specifically posting from my own profile because I want people to feel that authentic connection. Don't underestimate the fact that people want to feel those authentic connections. I would even sometimes say that it's harder as a brand to be creating those, because you're like, it feels like inauthentic. It feels kind of cheap to I'm not gonna say that I loved speaking online the other day with a brand, like you want to
Right.
create these moments where you feel like you're talking to a real human, and that's what builds loyalty. I mean, we even say it in we even see it, at like a small business, when they start growing and they go to another location that's bigger, you end up losing clients because people kind of like that little like authentic type of connection that you get with a smaller business. So I would say that I would kind of keep the same strategy in a way. I mean, with a business, you have to like kind of sync on the tone that you want to hit and how you want people to perceive you. When you are the brand, you can channel so much more of your personality into your community. And that's also why I love podcasts, because it's such like this intimate, connective type of experience, in a way that you're literally like, if these people are taking a time to listen to you speak on a topic for 30 minutes, an hour, like that's a real connection. They're listening to you while they're commuting to work, while they're cleaning their apartment, like you're really in their space in this way. So leverage that. I mean, if people want to hear your voice, they probably want to see your content. They probably want to see your posts and interact with them. Like I think that it shouldn't be a hindrance. I think that it can make you even just more yourself.
I love that. Riverside has a variety of, so Riverside has the main community in Riverside content creators. No, wait.
Yes, conversation creators.
Conversation creators. Riverside conversation creators. But one of the things that I love about Riverside is that you're also making room for a more diverse community as well. There's several other groups. Can you talk a little bit about those other side groups that have been created?
Yeah, well, you know a lot about the first one, which is our Spanish-speaking podcasters group. We found that it didn't seem like there were many communities that kind of spoke to that. And I also feel, and I know, I sent you the other day an article about how much the Spanish speaking community, like that podcast within that space are growing and listenership is up. So there should be a space for that. We also have a Black Creators Hub, and that's also just to uplift voices and have people like, there are some times where you want to speak to a group of 15,000 podcasters. And then there's sometimes where you want to speak to a smaller group that you feel like connects a bit more with you. And so that's kind of what we're going for, that we want to create experiences that, whether I compare it almost to like, there are some people that like to go to these big parties, and then there's some people who would rather go to like a dinner party of people that are kind of curated to be people that they might connect with more, you know?
Yep.
So it's kind of
Yep.
like pick your play in that way, and just creating more spaces for people to get to know each other. I mean, we also do meetups, and for every meetup, we create a WhatsApp group for the people that went to that meetup or registered, because maybe you couldn't make it to the meetup, or maybe you had a great conversation, or maybe you were in that room and thinking like, wow, I found my people. These are fellow podcasters. That shouldn't stop when you exit the meetup, right? So trying to create these little communities in everything that we do. I mean, even the Podcasters Roundtable, we're still, for the last two we did, we're still like emailing back and forth on those chats, because you find this community of like 4 people, even in that case, that just all care about social media or content growth or things like that. You just, try to say you could be part of multiple communities and get so much out of it.
I love it. And I'm coming from a photography background and for like 10 years plus. And one of the things that I loved about my experience as a photographer was getting to go to these big photography conferences where everybody would gather and just like party and learn too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But really,
learning
like, it was like, learning on the side. It was a networking event.
Mm-hmm, totally.
But it was like, this big build up for the year, but I felt that there wasn't that continuation. Like you had to wait until the next year. And what I love about podcasting, or one of the many things, is that it's like this continuous conversation. Like there's this really genuine interest in continuing building these relationships that really translates to like the very reason of why a personal brand, a person would like to create a podcast for their own business. It's like to build really authentic connections. And I just love that about podcasting. And I mean, there's also so much power to your voice, like what you can say, what you can share. And it's such an easy way to do it. Like there's really not too much that you need to start sharing your voice and your message and making an impact. And I think that's very powerful in being part of a community that actually encourages that. And it continues to foster that idea of creating a more connected world.
Yeah. And I mean, especially like there's like, I was a content writer. There's so many ways that you can write something to kind of to tell people about the tone that you want to strike. But then there's another way of just like hearing voices, hearing you laugh, hearing you, maybe I disagree, like having those kinds of conversations. Like there's no blog post that's going to beat that. There's no like article that's going to beat that.
Kendall, do you have any other tips for anybody who's wanting to build a community?
Yeah, I would say that I like to compare community building to kind of like hosting a party. So, like, what I like to say is that you want people to get to your party. How do you want people to get to your party? You first want it to be a party that people want to go to. How is that? How do you do that? By speaking with users or speaking with people who are listening to your podcast or your show or whatever it is, and understanding what they would want out of a party, right? The second would be having kind of the infrastructure that people would want to go to. The second would be kind of word of mouth of your friends saying, I'm going to this party, right? So saying having other people be able to spread, I love what so-and-so is doing with their community over here. You have to join it. Like kind of creating these super fans, really, once you've spoken to them and delivered what they want, like keeping that up, asking them, is there anything that you want to learn more about? Is there anything you want to XYZ, like making sure that community is still good for them. And then the third is kind of like your own words. So like if we're going to keep on going with this metaphor, like I want to have I want to be a representative of my own party. So how do I do that? I go to other parties and I am a great time. Like, don't you want to come to a party that I would host because I am just having such a great time with you here? So that's going to other communities and not spamming them with your links. Don't do that because that's not a party people want to go to. Like, instead, you answer people's questions, give thoughtful feedback to somebody, and they'll say, "Thanks so much for this advice." And you say, "No problem. I actually know it because I make this podcast. And if you're ever looking for more information on it, here it is." So really providing thoughtful advice. And on that kind of note, that when they come, again, through your interviews, if you're an interview podcast, asking questions that they connect with, want to hear about, think are interesting, also ties into all three of those. So you're the host, you're the person they want to party with, you're also catering to what they want at the party, which is thoughtful interviews that ask questions that they want to hear. I always say that the best hosts ask the questions for their listeners. So what that means is instead of what questions are on my mind as the host, I'm listening actively to the answer and then saying, if I had my headphones in, I'm walking on the street, I'm listening to this answer, what would my follow-up question be? Is there one part that I'm like, ooh, I want to know more about this? That's asking questions for your listeners and your community.
I love that that comparison, that analogy of the party, and I love it because, yeah, it's so true. If you're not intrigued by what's happening, then you're not really gonna be sure if you're gonna attend to the party or not. So you might not be interested in listening to what they have to say.
If you think about like a flyer for a party, or okay, you look at it and you're like, oh, are there DJs there I like, or games there that I like? If not, are my friends going? And if not, do I know the host? Those are really the three things that when you're looking for a party, you're like, oh, I want to be there because of one of these three things or a combination of them.
I love it. And this kind of ties a little bit more. I know we're talking about community, and now we're sort of shifting into interview.
Into party.
Into
now
party.
We're shifting
into
party.
Into party, yeah. But it kind of, this sort of takes me back to just sales strategies of whenever you're selling something, you're not just selling because, well, this is a great product because you made it, but really what is the outcome for the person that's purchasing that product or that service? What are they going to get? What's in it for them? So I do this with, right now I'm working with a client who's in the middle of a launch of several months. And it's, part of our strategy is showing what it would be like to be in that, to experience that event and be there, and what are they going to get from it. So it's the best way for you to sell something. It's show people what you're going to get from it, not just, hey, come to my party, but what's the experience?
That's why community usually within in a corporate type of place usually falls under marketing, because it is a part of marketing. It's we bring you into a product because of the product and because of the marketing. You start the product and it's, what are you using then? Using the product, you're connecting sometimes with customer service, but what more are you giving your users? Are you giving them opportunities to learn? And if you are, what are the business goals? I mean, the more people learn how to podcast, the more they're going to continue to podcast in this kind of example. So it's a community is a part of the marketing and business goal strategy in that way.
I agree. One thing, so a lot of people, when they start podcasting, they tend to go towards the route of having a lot of interview, because there is some perks of doing a podcast where it's mainly interview based, because there's, I would say, less preparation from the host, but there's still, that doesn't mean that there isn't any preparation whatsoever. So, from your background in journalism, what can you bring in and share with our audience about ways that they can prepare for an interview, for their podcast?
If you're preparing for an interview, I would say off the bat, that you should watch other interviews that this person has done, if you can. If they have other videos or other podcasts that they've done, they're looking for really three things. The first thing you're looking for is questions they've been asked a million times, because then you want to avoid them. Not just because like your listeners might not be stalkers of this person and like listening to all the things that they've recorded, but it's because like when you start to answer a question you've gotten a million times, you're like, like you don't, there's no spark behind your answer. So you don't want to get them into that zone. You also want to listen for if there are questions that you wish that somebody had followed up on, because it's cool to be able to say like, hey, you said this on another interview, play the clip. Have you evolved since then? Or is there something else that you like, kind of like pushing the question a bit more? I know everyone asks you about X, but actually I want to ask you about Y. Like kind of working that in is important. And then the third thing that I would look for is moments where they got animated. And so again, even if they don't have like this big repertoire of video and audio interviews, like if you see on Twitter/X that they are tweeting a lot about this one thing, or you see that they are like, you're able to really get into parts of the person that maybe you wouldn't see otherwise. Like maybe they're tweeting a lot about music and you're talking to a CEO, and then suddenly you're able to like humanize them in this way. You're saying like, I know you're a big rock fan. Like what song are you listening to when you had like a really good day at work? Like those that's just a random question that came from my brain. But like those kinds of moments, it's just that those make people. Those are when you want to listen to an interview. Like when you like the whole point of an interview is two people connecting and having a moment and having a conversation. So go into it with the idea that you want to have a conversation. And this goes to my fourth point, which is don't come over prepared. Like don't come with a million questions that you want to get to. Like know that half those questions might be gone. Like have a conversation, respond to somebody, because you don't go to a bar with a friend and you say, hey, we're going to cover what your feelings are at work today, how your family is, how your partner and you are doing, like it weaves. And then you're like, that
Yeah.
reminds me of this. And then you could even say like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot to ask, how's your family doing? Like that's how a conversation goes. And if you're going to have an interview podcast, like interview podcasts are special in the way that it's not a news hit. You're not like 5 minutes. Let's get to the main topic of the day. That's the fun of a podcast. Let the conversation weave a little bit. Don't come too like overly prepared.
And let the guest speak.
Yeah, you might be letting me speak a little too much. I'm rambling.
No. Like the other day, I was watching an interview from many years ago, and the person was very interested. Like the guest was very interesting, and the host was continuously interrupting. I'm like, I want to know what he's saying.
Yeah, I actually I put out a tweet a couple of months ago. I remember it was like, advice for first-time podcasters, wrong answers only. And it was a really funny thread. People were like, don't even use a microphone. Like there was like a whole thing. And somebody wrote, which made me laugh. It was whenever somebody has gives an answer to a question, make sure that you interrupt before they end and let them know that you also have gone through that, and then explain it in a longer version. And I started laughing because like, it is so true that sometimes you're like,
Yes.
Okay, let's mute,
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, I'm laughing so much, Harry.
Oh, good. Yay.
Yeah, I love this.
Me too. This is a lot of fun.
Yes. Okay, Kendall. What advice do you have for somebody who is starting podcasting this year and they want to build a community?
So starting podcasting, I would say that you should go into it kind of preparing, like knowing that it's a lift, like it's a lot of work, but also knowing that you make the rules. And in that way, like who says you need to post once every week? If you think that that you want to start a podcast and you like the time commitment is in the way for you, like maybe try a once a month podcast. You might not get the kind of traction that you're looking for, but if it's something that you want to do, then there are no rules that say how often and how long. Maybe it's a 15-minute podcast, like be able to bend those rules a little bit, and then don't let perfection get in the way of progress. Like don't forget, like don't say I'm not gonna post this because it's not absolutely perfect. Like spoiler alert, it will never be. And you just need to put something out that you feel like is actually high quality content that your listeners deserve. And everything from then to whatever perfection would be is all about getting to see, like your listeners getting to see your progress in that way. So I would say that. As far as building a community around that, I would say to have that person, the person that you think would be at that party in your community, in mind when you're coming up with episodes, when you're thinking of your questions. Like community building, it's almost like social media clips. Like sometimes you want to ask a question that will make a bit of a good clip. Like those good clips don't just sometimes come to you. So in the same way, like ask questions that will build, like that will appeal to your community. Create content that people from your community will like. Just have them in the back of your mind if that's something that you want to do, because those building blocks end up building something a lot bigger.
That was really beautiful, Kendall, and I love it. Very inspiring. Thank you so very much for being in the show here and just sharing your thoughts and experience about community building, interviews, and just this awesome world of podcasting.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to. And I'm glad that we got to do this because I've always loved meeting with you. And so I'm glad that we finally are recording one of our meetings so that we can get it out into the world.
I know, likewise. Yeah. How can people reach out to you?
So I'll first plug the community because, we've been talking a lot about it. If it's Conversation Creators by Riverside on Facebook, and we have about 15,000 creators on there. And I know that creating, especially remotely, recording remotely, can be a little bit of a lonely time. And you're like, how many Google searches can I keep doing on every question I have? I'm always so impressed by this community because people really want to help each other out and they're really great people. So highly recommend Conversation Creators by Riverside. And then you can reach me on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me on Instagram. It's Kendall Breitman. It'll probably be spelled somewhere here in these show notes. And also on Riverside, if you just reach out to riverside.fm, any of their social platforms, I'm always going through it to find ways to connect with the community. So feel free to reach out there as well.
And I will be putting the links to all of this on today's show notes so that you can connect with Kendall and Riverside. So, Kendall, thank you so very much. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. I'm excited about it.
Thanks so much for tuning in on today's episode, and I will see you on the next one.